We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Jeff Martin, and I am the Director of Communications and Public Affairs for the American Anthropological Association. I am an older white male with graying brown hair and black framed glasses, and I'm wearing a buttoned down gray dress shirt, and I'm reporting to you from the confines still of my bedroom, unfortunately, although hopefully we're breaking away from this. Welcome to Meet the Seats, the MPAC Meet the Seats. Let me give you a little bit of history about MPAC to go back. Up until 2017, we had a number of committees covering a myriad of topics. And not only were there committees, there were subcommittees and working groups and task forces and sub-working groups. I mean, it just was going horizontally out and out and out. And what happened was a lot of these committees were not talking with each other. We had a silo effect, and thus there was overlapping on certain issues. And so what we decided to do was make kind of what we call a super committee and make it more vertical than horizontal, and cover some main areas that we wanted. So in 2017, the board gave approval to convene the Members Programmatic Advisory and Advocacy Committee. Yes, I hate the title. I think all of us on here, we don't like the name of it. Hopefully we can change it at some point, but it's better known as MPAC, MPAAC. And basically what we decided to do is narrow it down to the key areas of ethics, human rights, labor and workforce, public policy, anti-racism and social justice, gender equity, practicing applied public sector, world anthropologies, and student interests. So those are the main seats within MPAC. What we want to do is kind of put a face on MPAC, so you know really who's basically representing you, and have a meet the seats, which we're starting now, we'll continue in the fall, and we're breaking it down to just 3 seats at a time to keep it more manageable. To give you a little more background on it, each seat, there are 2 people to each seat, and one is elected and one is appointed by the president. So that's what the structure looks like. At the top, overseeing all of this, we have an overall chair, Susan Mazur-Stoneman. We have an outward-facing chair, Ramona Perez, who is the incoming president after Akil. And we have an inward-facing chair, Thurka Sangramurthy, kind of helping herd everything together. What I want to do is say, because there's not a lot of people on this right now, I wish there were more, but that's good because we can make it a little bit more open and keep it more conversational. So if you want, feel free to turn your cameras on and your mics on if you want. We're going to start by, again, I want to keep it a fluid conversation, and use the chat if you want to, or if you have questions, that sort of a thing. But with us today, we decided to break it down to the gender equity seats, the labor seat, and the anti-racism and social justice seats. So with us for gender equity is Carla Jones and Stevie Marino. Representing the labor seats are Jessica Mason and Karen Rignall. And for anti-racism and social justice, it's Gabriela Torres. We also have Layla Brown, but she couldn't make it with us today, so it'll just be Gabriela doing this. Also, to keep it conversational and keep it really open, we are recording the first part of this, where they're going to talk about kind of why they joined MPAC, what they hope to achieve within their seats, that sort of a thing. We are going to stop recording as soon as we get to questions and answers. So it will not be recorded at that point, so you feel free to kind of bring it up whatever you like. With that, I would like to just start by introducing the gender equity seats. I'm sorry, we are starting with gender equity, sorry. Carla Jones and Stevie Marino. So Carla, if you want to take it away.
This is Carla. Thank you, Jeff. I am a white woman with brown and graying hair, similar to Jeff's. And I have on gold eyeglasses and a white shirt against a black backdrop. And together with Stevie Marino, I am one half of the gender equity seat representation on MPAC. I am also an associate professor at the University of Colorado Boulder, and formerly I was president of the Association for Feminist Anthropology from 2017 to 2019. I was elected, I was the appointed gender equity seat, and I formally joined the committee in December of 2020. I believe I last until 2023, if I'm not mistaken. Stevie, do you want to join?
Sure, thank you. So I'm Stevie Marino. I am a brown woman with long brownish black hair and sideswipe bangs. I have a white shirt on with colorful necklaces and a very sunny background. Hopefully it's not too distracting. I am the elected gender equity seat. I am actually in my last and final year, sadly. And I am a practicing anthropologist. I work in birth work and do a lot of research relating to pregnancy and birth outcomes and traditions.
This is Carla. I believe we're going to rotate around. So Jessica, were you supposed to be the next person I pass off to?
Sure. This is Jessica Mason. Wasn't sure if we're doing all introductions and then talking about projects. Hi, Jessica Mason. I'm the labor seat. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a white woman with short brown hair and brown glasses. And today I am coming to you all from my mother's office because I'm visiting my parents for the first time in many, many months, which is pretty exciting. I'm one of the labor seats. I'm coming to the end of my term this fall. And so I've been at MPAC for part of the transition from the old way that Jeff referred to the new MPAC structure, and trying to hold together some of the projects that we had planned to be working on through the pandemic, and seeing those over into Karen's capable hands through this year. Karen?
Thank you so much, Jessica. My name is Karen Rignall. I use she, her pronouns. I am a 51-year-old Arab American woman, very light. I have brown curly hair, short, and greenish glasses. And I'm speaking to you from my office today with some bookshelves in the back. And I just really appreciate this opportunity to speak with everyone. I'm a newly associate professor in the Department of Community and Leadership Development, anthropologist by training, and as it should be apparent, I guess, since I'm here with AAA. And I feel pretty new to MPAC because I joined just prior to the pandemic. So I feel like I'm just getting started in many respects. And Jessica has been a great mentor to me. I'm not actually sure if I'm the elected or appointed because of not complications, but a longer story about the election than we need to get into. I'm just very committed to issues of labor rights and equality within the university generally, and it's part of my research and engaged work also in the College of Agriculture where I am now. And so I'll leave it at that because I think we'll come back to our projects. Jeff, I have to admit that I do not know who I'm supposed to hand it off to.
At this point, it would be Gabriella to introduce herself.
Okay, Gabriella, to you.
Hello, my name is M. Gabriela Torres. I am a middle-aged white Latinx woman with mid-length brown hair and red-rimmed glasses, sitting in my living room, which has a green background with photographs I took in Guatemala, where I'm from. I am a professor of anthropology and coordinator of public health here at Wheaton College. On MPAC, I now serve as the anti-racism and social justice seat with Layla Brown Vincent, and previously served on the gender equity seat. Outside of MPAC, I also serve as AAA's ombudsperson for sexual harassment and sexual assault. I have been at Impact from the beginning of Impact. I, as well as Jeff, really dislike the name, but alas, it's what we've got. And I'll pass it back over to Carla.
This is Carla. Thank you. I'm delighted that everyone who's attending has had a chance to get to know the members of the committee that are present today. I am particularly delighted because these are the people who have worked with me since December to both get me up to speed with my new role on MPAC, but also to very quickly, from my perspective, launch into what we felt was an urgent and pressing undertaking, which was to help the AAA craft guidelines for potentially mitigating the uneven effects of the pandemic on anthropologists, particularly those in academic positions, but also those who are in practicing or applied positions as much as possible. We noticed that the effects of the pandemic, as has been widely documented across industries and fields, also in the academy, amplified or exacerbated otherwise less visible but profound forms of inequality. As a result, the forms of response that particularly academic institutions took towards both their students, but particularly their employees, their faculty, ran the risk of exacerbating long-term inequalities. So together with the labor and anti-racism members of MPAC, Stevie and I worked closely to try to draft a pretty substantial document that is now in the hands of the AAA Executive Board for consideration, with documentation of the kinds of long-term risks to faculty productivity, reward recognition and advancement, and the potential solutions that institutions could take to offset those risks. One of the things that many of you may already understand, as well as any of us who were thinking about this, is that the nature of academic scholarship is both individual, in that we are individual scholars undertaking individual research, and we are parts of institutions and communities. And to the extent that the uneven effects of the pandemic may be borne by individuals, we wanted to bring to the fore the possibility of concrete, clear, actionable guidance that the institutional communities, of which many of us are a part, could consult to remind and correct some of these potentially uneven effects. As was clear very early in the pandemic, it became quite evident that female scholars across the sciences were particularly burdened with the sort of triple whammy of research, caregiving, and other forms of labor expectations. As we as a team moved forward, we recognized that the gendered component of these uneven effects, of course, intersect and are amplified by other forms of identity and or marginalization. So the document is now in AAA's hands. We look forward to it being refined, accepted, adopted, and then hopefully circulated publicly so that it can serve its final purpose, which is to be available for individual faculty, for for department chairs, for evaluation committees at the deans or other forms of other levels of evaluation on university campuses, and as a statement of support from the discipline itself on behalf of academic anthropologists and practicing anthropologists broadly. So that's a brief summary of the piece. We can tell you more about how we worked on it together more, but I just wanted to give you a sense of the fact that this was our baby over the last 6 months.
And also, Carla, if I could add, this is Jeff Martin at AAA again. It's actually going before the executive board on Saturday, where they will vote on it. So hopefully we'll have an answer real soon on that.
This is Carla. Thank you, Jeff. I'm excited about that too. I hope that once we get it into a polished form, it will not only be publicly available and a document for evaluation committees to consult, but we will potentially also produce a PowerPoint slide document that can be easily potentially projected or used by evaluation committees. This document won't have any utility if it isn't circulated and consulted and implemented.
Thanks, Carla. Stevie, do you want to bring up any topic you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I have to keep moving around. My gardener is blowing all over, so I keep moving spaces. But our seats in the last few years of my term have worked a lot around sexual violence and harassment. The previous seats, which was Gabriella mentioned that she was on, as well as Diane Shandy, they worked heavily on the AAA sexual harassment policy, which I think is really important to mention. There's been a lot of updates, but essentially that's a lot of the work that these seats have really focused on. We had workshops as well as different sessions during the 2019 AAA meeting around themes of sexual violence and essentially how to create safer learning environments and also just environments in the AAA setting. Yes, sexual harassment and assault. We collaborated with AAA staff in rolling out provisions to make the annual meeting safer. And we also serve in this position on the annual Gender Equity Award that happens every year. One of the other things, depending on the political climate, has been Title IX monitoring, as well as updating when required. So those are just a few things that I felt called to mention. And I really hope that those efforts are continued when we eventually go back to in-person anything.
Perfect. Thanks, Stevie. Appreciate it. Let's now go over to Jessica, if you would, and you want to tell us about some of the projects you're working on and what you hope to accomplish?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. This is Jessica. So on the labor seats, we have been spending some time thinking about the potential for our role to be really a convener and creator of space for member-driven projects that we then can try to help support and move forward. So one of the primary focuses that we've had is picking up some work that was originally driven by Ilana Gershon, who I see is on today, so great, in thinking through the real harms and challenges of the job search process and the ways that that could be improved, and that the association could play a role in driving that change, both through what shifts might be possible in our own policies and practices within the association, as well as potentially finding ways to shift department cultures or push for change at the university level, where often a lot of these policies are set. And so our next step on this piece is that we are in the process of putting together an initial discussion session with representatives of a variety of the sections to come together and think through which pieces, each person could bite up and chew, as well as, continuing to collect additional ideas to drive forward the job search improvement. And I would say secondly, and Karen may want to talk more about both what I just said and the next piece, we're also thinking about this as a sort of stepping stone to build out a sense of what MPAC's role is more broadly in improving labor conditions for anthropologists. Because we know there's a sort of like tip of an iceberg around the job search process, and then this whole iceberg around the whole economy and job market for anthropologists, the experiences of contingent labor, and all of these things that we know many members care a lot about and want to take action on. And so we're thinking about what we can learn from this first project to become a more effective platform for members to take action on these issues. Karen?
Thank you, Jessica. Yeah, this is Karen. I do really want to make sure that we have ample time to talk. I think Jessica described our work well. I think the key thing in sort of setting this priority is that we have some pretty concrete recommendations that Alana was able to develop based on a survey that the Society for Anthropology of Work conducted with AAA members. And so they've already collected, I think, some really meaningful evidence, and Alana and her group put a lot of effort into developing some ideas and being able to have this discussion and a set of recommendations around the academic job search is as Jessica mentioned, our first step. And we have some pretty straightforward recommendations, but building this as an association-wide effort, I think, is really important for building a labor voice and thinking of ourselves as advocates for each other and for other anthropologists and for other workers in our universities and workplaces. So I noticed that that Teresa, you're talking about many anthropologists considering retiring and changing, that many are retiring, and including academics. I do think we're going to see some real important structural shifts within anthropology, just as we're seeing in the academy as a whole. So I think an important thing for our work in our seats is also to think about what kind of organizing can happen on university campuses to link ourselves with a larger labor movement too. So perhaps I'll leave it at that so that we can open it up.
Thanks, Karen.
This is
Appreciate
Gabriella.
it. Yeah, thank you. I was just going to turn it over to you, Gabriella. Thank you.
So just before we open it up, Karen, I will go forward as the Anti-Racism and Social Justice seat, which, as I mentioned, I hold with Layla Brown Vincent. The first year in this seat, what we worked on was actually to change the name of the seat from what used to be the minority seat. And as you will notice, there are many vestiges in our association of the word minority. And those of us who had been in the seat and the ones who had been before me felt very strongly that it should move beyond being called minorities and actually be intentional as to what kind of work this seat was meant to address, rather than point to the social identities of the persons holding that seat. We had no other MPAC seat that was focused on person's social identity. We didn't have a senior anthropologist seat. We didn't have a woman anthropologist seat. We didn't have a transgendered person seat, but we did have a minority seat. And if the intention of this seat was to work on anti-racist agendas of our associations and social justice agendas for our association moving forward, it should be called that. But it was a little bit more of a challenge than what we expected. And it certainly took us over a year to work. Actually, it took the first 2 years of MPAC to work in changing that name. Before that time, we've tried to focus on getting some content that we thought was important for anti-racism and social justice. So the year before the pandemic, we organized a panel on citational politics in our association. This year, there will be a panel going forward, which is a carryover from last year on policing. As Carla talked about, we also collaborated on the shared document for guidance post-COVID or even during COVID times, as we still find ourselves in. And what was important for this seat in particular is that we were not only facing a health crisis or a public health crisis, but actually we were facing dual and reinforcing crises. And that, and to be blunt about it, the United States has been living through a racial crisis in an acute form during the period of the pandemic, as much as it's been about the pandemic. And so having our document be cognizant of the dual impact of both crises on scholars was important. In addition, during this year, I've worked with an appointed committee from across the association to rethink the nominations process and thinking about equity concerns in that process, thinking about how have we been practicing equity when it comes to nominations? What forms of equity are we considering and which forms of equity are we not considering? That's been the work of the seat for the past year. This will be my concluding year on impact and on this seat. And so I'm hopeful that whoever takes up this role will continue to think about the issues of equity and anti-racism.
Thank you, Gabriella. This is Jeff Martin again with the AAA. At this point, we are going to open it up to questions and answers. So we are going to stop the recording